now, a new federal lawsuit over same-sex marriage. This one focuses on religious freedom. After two ordained Christian ministers were told they're going to face fines and jail time because they declined to officiate at a same-sex marriage ceremony. The ministers, a husband and wife, both in their 60s, run a wedding chapel in Idaho right across the street from the county clerk's office, where you get your license to get married. Well, joining us now, Heather Hansen, trial attorney, and Jonna Spilbor, a criminal defense attorney. All right. Ladies, this is a tricky one, but the officials there say now that the federal circuit has struck down the ban on same-sex marriage, that their local ordinance, which says you can't discriminate against anyone, means, Heather, these two have to do the weddings, or else it's 180 days in jail and $1,000 per day.
That's right, per day.
Per day that they won't do the ceremonies.
And listen, this couple has a lot of different arguments based on the Constitution. They have a First Amendment argument, they have an expression of religion argument, they have a substantive due process argument because they're losing money. The problem is, though, that there is an exception for religious societies and associations. Because they are charging for their marriages, they fall outside that exception. And so they are the ones that are going to be subject to this law, and they may have some difficulty fighting it because of that.
Yeah, and Jonna, they say that this is a wedding chapel. They do this as a ministry, that each marriage ceremony that they perform, they talk about God, they quote the Bible.
Right.
Every couple who gets married, they give them, I think it's CDs of sermons about how to have a long-lasting marriage, and it's all based on biblical principles. This isn't just your basic drive-through kind of place. I mean, for them, it's a chapel, and it's religion-based.
Absolutely, and that's why the First Amendment is going to win this one. It's a sensitive issue. Even for proponents of same-sex marriage, we have to let the First Amendment prevail over this local ordinance, essentially, which is the issue here. You know, and I likened it to a couple of things. If you took the religious aspect out, if the First Amendment weren't an issue, and these people ran a convenience store and they said no shirt, no shoes, no heterosexual ideology, no service, they would be subject to this ordinance and could go to jail and get fined. But the religious aspects gives these people a First Amendment right to say, look, we're not going to marry you any more than we would marry somebody outside of our own religion, no matter what it was, even if they were heterosexual.
So how do you put this in the context of the other cases that we've seen, the Christian photographers who said it was their expression, their artistry when they did photography? They didn't want to be part of sending a message when they're supporters of traditional marriage, not of same-sex marriage. And we've seen the bakeries as well who say, I'll bake you a cake for anything, but I don't want to do it for a same-sex ceremony.
It starts to become the court's job to determine who's more strongly felt in their religion. So here you've got actual ministers who are actually doing it a religious rite. And so here I think that they're going to have a much stronger argument. As Jonna said, under the First Amendment, First Amendment doesn't just cover what you say, it's what you choose not to say as well. And so they are going to have a much stronger argument than, say, the florists or the bakers. At the same time, though, I think a lot of those cases you will see go up on appeals, because this issue, in the wake of the Hobby Lobby case that just recently came down, is not going to end here. It's going to go up further to further courts.
Yeah, and I mean, there's established case law for things. You mentioned the speech part, where you can't force students to say, for instance, the Pledge of Allegiance. You can't force people to have a driver's license plate, a license plate that has a message that they don't want to endorse. Do you think, Jonna, that speech will be the key here?
I think religion is going to be more the key than speech, but you also have to remember that even though same-sex proponents are making great headway, it's still not the law of the land. We're only up at about 30 states where you can legally get married. Once it is the law of the land, if that's where we go, then I think this issue will become a little bit more difficult for the ministers to say argue. But let's put it this way. Hey, if you only want to marry same-sex couples, you should be able to do that too.
Yeah, and you might have a budding business in Idaho.
Exactly.
Well, cater to those who want that specific wedding.
And the free market should decide. I mean, ultimately, that is what is at work here. The free market should decide so that people can boycott them. If they have a problem with the idea that they won't do same-sex marriages, then don't go there. Boycott them. But the free market should ultimately decide these types of issues.
Yeah, do you think we'll ultimately come to a balance? I mean, because the pendulum, when things are happening and there's movement, I mean, it swings, greatly in both directions. But do you think we'll settle to a place where, in this case, when you have ministers here, it'll be unequivocal? Because I have a feeling that there's going to be a whole lot of attention on this case when it ultimately, I mean, it's been filed. They've asked for a restraining order against enforcement. These folks say, if they go 1 week without doing this, it's 3.5 years in jail and $7,000 in fines.
And that's insane. And, just because people can fight about something doesn't mean we have to. If I were going to marry somebody and the minister didn't want to marry me for whatever because she didn't like my shoes,
which would never happen.
Which would never happen.
Shoes.
But I would simply go someplace else.
that wants your business.
Right.
And that's often the argument. All right, well, we'll see. Good to see you both and have our legal eagles weigh in.